My name's Lee Bermejo. I work for DC Comics mostly. I've done a series of graphic novels with characters like the Joker, Batman, Superman, and most recently I'm doing a project for Vertigo called The Suiciders that I'm writing and drawing that comes out late next year. The first Batman project I ever worked on was a book called Batman Deathblow with Brian Azzarello. It was right around the time that Wildstorm had been bought by DC Comics, I think in 1999. And at that point in time, I was still working in Wildstorm Studios. So editorially, they were interested in still using Wildstorm characters. So they wanted to do a book that featured some character of Wildstorm that I liked. My favorite had always been Deathblow. And at the same time, I really wanted to do Batman because it's a childhood dream, blah, 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 you know. And at this point in time, I was reading Brian Azzarello's first few issues of 100 Bullets. I really liked them. And I had read his miniseries with Eduardo Rizzo called Johnny Double. And so Brian was brand new still. And I really, really loved his voice, like his writing style. And so through a mutual friend, Tim Bradstreet, illustrator Tim Bradstreet, we organized this project called Batman Deathblow that was a crossover between those two characters. And it was thrilling because it was like I was working on Batman, but I wasn't responsible to DC editorial yet. And so I could do the costume however I wanted. We had a huge amount of freedom with the story. No one was really controlling what we were doing. So it was an amazing creative experience because it was just kind of like they left us alone to do whatever we wanted to do with a huge iconic character. And so that's where that book came from. And yeah, it kind of was the beginning of for me artistically of doing something that I felt pretty strongly about, which was putting a personal stamp on each character you do, even if it's something as iconic as Batman. And I'd like him to be flawed, a very flawed man. And so my favorite versions of the character throughout the years have always been, you know, Dark Knight Returns and things like this, where he's an extremist, but at the same time he's a very flawed man with a moral core that fluctuates, but to him it doesn't fluctuate. It's very specific. But visually, I like to see him be a kind of like. I'm interested in a Batman that feels like he could really perform like urban warfare. You know, I want someone who seems utilitarian, who seems. I mean, he's going to war, you know. It's not. He's not a superhero. He's not a vigilante. He is a soldier. That's the way I feel about him. And he conducts himself accordingly. He's a general on a battlefield, and that battlefield is an urban battlefield. And so I don't see him as being very superheroic. You know, I don't see him making huge. I don't know. Huge superheroic poses and gestures and things like this. I see him working much more under the surface of things, and the quickest way he can get a job done, he'll get a job done. I see him more as Travis Bickle meets, I guess, James Bond, but James Bond in a much more specific way. You know, not a globe-trotting. I don't see him as being a globe-trotting adventurer. I see him literally being a guy who wouldn't leave Gotham City because he literally wouldn't, like, he's so obsessive about that place and about doing his job in that place that he couldn't leave it, you know? So I see him being a bit more like Travis Bickle, maybe in the sense that he's psychologically, he's right there, man. I mean, he's on the edge. It would take very little for him to, you know, go a completely in a different direction with his life. But yeah, I suppose my version of the character probably doesn't differ that much from Frank Miller's version of the character, you know. I just tend to like a little bit more realism than maybe Frank. Yeah, I did a Batman project that I wrote and drew called Batman Noel, which was kind of like, for me, it was kind of like a writing exercise, because I wanted to write and draw my own project, and specifically a Batman project. But I wanted it to be something that was still reflected my world and my view of the character, but something that was that was also spoke in kind of a broader thematic way. At the same time, I was thinking seriously about adapting A Christmas Carol, but doing like a real adaptation, not doing these fluffy kind of movies that we've seen or other. I mean, like, if you read A Christmas Carol, there's an element of real like darkness to that story, and it's disturbing, and there's ghosts, and like, but the ghosts in the story are more disturbing than the ones you see kind of in the movies and Muppet, adaptations. And I want to do something serious, and then the two stories just kind of mixed together. And I thought it was a great way to do a Batman that I love, which is an older, crankier kind of like Batman who's more, like I said, his moral center kind of fluctuates, so isn't necessarily heroic in every way, like he's kind of an asshole, and like I like that, there's show the character as a bit of a cock, and then see if there's that moral core though that still exists, so that he kind of like fluctuates around it, but then he always finds that center, and that's something that separates him from criminal. With Joker, it was more I just knew that character. I felt like I knew how to do him immediately. I knew what I wanted to do with him. I knew what kind of story I wanted to tell. And it matched very much with Brian's idea. We knew we never wanted to get into the Joker's head, because you can't take away that power from him. He's crazy. So the more you know of Joker, the less kind of scary he becomes.
Never start with the head. The victim gets all fuzzy. You can't feel the neck. See?
You wanted me. Here I am.
I wanted to see what you'd do. And you didn't disappoint.
I've been kind of attached in a roundabout way to these movies before, with the Joker in 2008. See, it's all this stuff that becomes kind of weird when it comes to the movies, and you don't really know what goes on behind the scenes. You don't know how much of the information they're getting from DC, from the offices. You don't know how much of that is of their own kind of design. Unfortunately, there's really no way for me to ever have the answer to that question. And the only thing I know is that, we were working on that book well before they even started filming. I mean, I started that book in 2006, I finished that book in February of 2008. So, the movie came out in July or something like that. I mean, what happened there, who knows? I mean, I see a lot of differences between what they did and what I do. I think what we did was something a little more dark and psychotic. What they did was a little more colorful, and he still wore like the purple suit and had like the funny voice and stuff like that. Brilliant. It was a brilliant version of the character. I loved it. But in my head, my version of the character was very, very different, So who knows what they did there. I think that it's also a question of similar sensibilities. Nolan and his crew, they're trying to do something pretty realistic, right? Like something kind of grounded and believable, I guess, if you can say that. And that's what we were trying to do. So it's just kind of approaching things from maybe the same place, arriving at different destinations, if that makes any sense. First of all, I never would have picked Ben Affleck. He wasn't even on my list of like people I would have considered for the role, ever. Like, I was shocked when they announced that he was cast. But I guess, either to it was either good timing or just maybe it was just the right mindset for that choice at the time. I just watched Argo. I just gotten Argo on Blu-ray and watched Argo. Was very, very impressed by it. I love The Town. I think The Town is a fantastic movie. I love Gone Baby Gone. I think that Affleck as a filmmaker is extremely intelligent and technically is amazing. I think that people confuse Ben Affleck with these other 3 bad movies he did 12 years ago, you know what I mean? Like, and I haven't even seen a couple of them. I mean, everybody knows Daredevil, you know, in our world. And yeah, it's not a very good movie. I mean, there's just not much to be said other than that. But I don't think that was necessarily Affleck's fault. You know, I think that movie, I mean, how much new metal can you put in a superhero movie before it starts to become like, oh my God, like what is this? Like an advertisement for, like, you know, a biker bar or something like that? Like I didn't really understand that movie in a lot of different ways. But he has an intelligence, and Bruce Wayne's intelligent, so I think that he can bring that to the table. Physically, he's the most kind of accurate Batman we've seen yet, right? Like he's 6'3" or 4" or something like that. He's a big dude. You know, for me, really, it all comes down to the story of this movie. If the story of this movie is not good, it doesn't really matter who's playing him, you know? I was like a really big Christian Bale before he was cast as Batman. And then, like, even his performance, as good as I thought it was, like, dude, I can't stand that Batman voice that he does. It's like that gruff, like, growl of a voice. I really don't like it. And, like, the costume in those Nolan movies, I was not a fan of the costume they did. So, I mean, for me, I'm just more interested in seeing a new version of the character, you know? We'll see.
Let's hope it's good.
Yeah.